The phone I threw into the pool cost around $1,100. It sank into the chlorinated water, barely 6 feet deep, in less than 3 seconds. My son-in-law lunged after it like a madman. My daughter screamed too, but she was screaming at me. The strange thing is, just minutes earlier, everyone in that backyard had witnessed a 63-year-old man who was terrifyingly calm. I didn't lose my temper. I didn't fight back. Even as my own dinner was flipped upside down onto the concrete, sauce running in streaks through the cracks in the patio. No one understood how a man could endure that much, and no one could have guessed that his silence would end with a single throw. 10 years ago, if anyone had told me I'd do something like that, I would have laughed and called them crazy. Because I've always been the kind of man who fixes broken things, not the kind who breaks them. If you've ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, if you've ever endured so much that you lost your own voice, then this story is for you. But before we begin, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from. Alright, let me tell you how a steak ended up on the concrete. My name is Walt Jensen. I'm 63, and I spent 36 years keeping the city buses of Kansas City running brakes, transmissions, diesel engines, older than most of my supervisors. I retired 3 years ago with a bad left knee, 1 hearing aid, and grease worked so deep into my knuckles, I don't believe it's ever coming out. I live in Lee's Summit, in the same brick ranch my wife Marlene and I bought in 1991. She picked the redbud tree in the backyard. I built the deck myself, 1 paycheck at a time. The pool came years later, 18 months of Saturday side jobs, fixing other people's cars so my family could swim in August. Nothing about that place came easy. Maybe that's why I never once took it for granted. Marlene passed 5 years ago, ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the morning, I held her hand in our bedroom and felt her let go. After that, Sunday barbecues became the way I held on to what was left of us. Same backyard, same grill, same folding table I've refinished 3 separate times. I still use her rub. She wrote it on an index card in fading blue ink. Brown sugar, chili powder, black pepper, and a spoonful of ground coffee, which sounds wrong until you taste it. Every time the fat hits the coals and starts talking, I can see her standing beside me, stealing a burnt end before dinner and swearing she didn't. Those memories hurt. They also keep her close. Some of you know exactly what I mean. Grief isn't a wall you get over. It's a room you learn to live in. My daughter Rachel almost never missed a Sunday. She's 32, a pediatric nurse downtown, smart, kind, tireless. At least she used to be all 3 at once. Somewhere along the way she got worn down from standing in the space between her husband and me, and quietly moved to his side of it. Kyle Bennett, 35, mortgage broker with a sideline flipping investment properties. Whitened smile, designer sunglasses on cloudy days, a leased German SUV that cost more per month than my first mortgage payment. And listen, I never cared about any of that. Let a young man enjoy his toys. What I cared about was how he looked at people who had less, especially older people. He never insulted me straight out. He didn't have to. He worked in small change. Walt, they make hearing aids with Bluetooth now, you know. That truck should be in a museum, not a driveway. Still grilling with charcoal? There's an app for that. Everyone would chuckle politely. Rachel would squeeze my arm afterward. Dad, he's kidding. Maybe. But a joke stops being a joke when it always lands on the same person, and never once on the man telling it. I let it slide, year after year, for 2 reasons. Because I love my daughter more than my pride, and because in her last weeks, Marlene made me promise I'd never let bitterness empty our table. I kept that promise, longer than I should have. That Sunday started beautiful. Real Missouri summer cardinals in the redbud, my old country station playing low from the garage, 4 Kansas City strips resting under foil while the potatoes finished over the coals. Rachel brought her mother's potato salad recipe, close enough to make my chest ache. Kyle arrived 25 minutes late carrying exactly 1 item, an imported sparkling water for himself. He looked at the steaks and said, "Still buying Prime, Walt? Bold habit on a pension." I smiled and said some things are worth the money. He laughed like I'd made his point for him. I let it go. We sat down, and for a while it was good. Rachel told us about a little patient who'd finally gone home after 4 months in the hospital, and I asked questions, and she lit up. and I saw the woman she was before life got so crowded. Then Kyle looked at my plate. "That's a lot of steak," he said. I grinned. "I've earned it." And he reached across the table. For half a second I thought he wanted the sauce. Instead, his forearm swept flat across my plate: steak, potato, corn, all of it, and my dinner hit the patio with a crack that stopped every conversation in the yard. My fork spun in a slow circle on the concrete and lay still. Kyle looked down for half a beat. Then he shrugged and delivered the line he'd clearly been saving. "At your age, big guy, skipping a meal might be doing you a favor." Nobody laughed. Not this time. His own parents studied their plates. The neighbor kids went silent, and I pushed my chair back, my knee filing its usual complaint, and stood up. "And I want to confess something embarrassing, because I promised you honesty." For one strange second, my first instinct was to apologize, to smooth it over, to make everyone else comfortable while my dinner soaked into the concrete. Think about that. He humiliated me. And my reflex was to fix the mood. That's what decades of peacekeeping does to a man. It rewires your alarms. If you've ever caught yourself apologizing for someone else's cruelty just to get a room breathing again, you know exactly the wiring I'm talking about. Then I noticed his phone, brand new, top of the line, laid beside his glass like a small trophy while he reached for another burger. I walked over. I picked it up. He frowned. "What are you doing?" And I didn't answer, because there was nothing left in me worth saying. I took 6 slow steps to the edge of the pool my Saturdays had paid for, and opened my hand. One clean splash, 8 feet down. I turned around and gave him back his own sentence, word for word in spirit. "It's just a phone." The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then the yard exploded. Kyle sprinting to the water's edge, shouting things I won't repeat, kicking off his loafers, staring into the deep end like volume could make electronics float. His mother gasped. His father rubbed his forehead. And my daughter, my Rachel, rounded on me with her eyes blazing and said, "Dad, are you serious right now?" And there it was. The real wound of the whole afternoon. And it wasn't on the patio. My dinner was on the ground. Years of little insults were on the ground. And not once did my daughter ask if I was okay. The only casualty she could see was the phone. I got my keys off the kitchen counter. Nobody tried to stop me. Backing my old Silverado down the driveway, I caught one last picture in the mirror. Kyle pacing the pool deck, Rachel crying, the steak still lying where it fell. I should have felt guilty. Instead, I felt tired. Not old man tired. The other kind. 20 minutes later, on 470, her voicemail came through the truck speakers, voice shaking, "Dad, you have no idea what you've just started." I listened to it twice in my driveway. She was right. I didn't. But I was about to learn. For 2 days, nobody came by. Nobody asked if I'd eaten dinner after mine ended up on the patio. What I got instead was 3 text messages, and I want to read you the inventory, because the inventory is the story. Sunday night. "You need to replace his phone." Monday morning. "Dad, this is humiliating. His parents saw everything." Monday afternoon. "Kyle says if you apologize and cover the damage, we can move past this. Move past this." I sat at my kitchen table with coffee going cold, reading those 3 messages over and over, doing the math on what wasn't in them. Not one "Are you okay?" Not one "What happened?" before I looked up. The house was quiet, the way a house gets when you've filled it with someone for 30 years and then suddenly haven't. The refrigerator hummed. The hallway clock ticked. Outside, the wind lifted the grill cover and slapped it once against the deck rail. Marlene used to holler from the living room that the thing would end up in Kansas if I didn't tie it down. I almost smiled. Then I didn't. Her chair still sat across from me. Same cushion. Same scratch on the leg from when Rachel was 7 and dragged it across the room to reach the cookie shelf. I know people who clear everything out after a spouse dies, repaint, donate, rearrange. I never could. Every corner of that house still had Marlene in it. The recipe box by the stove, the bird calendar by the back door, the dented yellow mixing bowl she swore Shungiban every fancy one Rachel ever bought her. And now my own family had managed to make me feel like a guest. In the house Marlene and I built out of overtime and second-hand furniture. By Tuesday the internet did what it does. A cousin out in Olathe posted something about seniors who can't control their tempers. Kyle's mother shared an inspirational quote about forgiveness and maturity. One of Rachel's friends commented, and this is the one I stared at: "Some people just get mean when they get old." Mean. I turned that word over for a long time. Then I did what old mechanics do when the feelings get too loud to hold with bare hands. I found something to fix. The latch on the garage cabinet had been sticking since spring. I sat on a milk crate, took the whole assembly apart, dropped one tiny screw and spent 10 minutes hunting it under the bench, muttering vocabulary Marlene would have fined me for. And the entire time, the same film ran on a loop behind my eyes. The plate cracking, Kyle shrugging, and Rachel yelling at me. Around 3 that afternoon, Ernie Vaughn appeared in the open garage door. Ernie's 72, retired from the water department, and walks his overweight corgi twice a day whether the dog consents or not. He'd been at the barbecue after Marlene passed. He started showing up Sundays with a store-bought pie and a story about accidentally buying 2. "You busy?" he asked. I held up the latch, trying to save a $7 part from retirement. He nodded like that was a complete answer, stepped inside, and put his hands in his pockets, which worried me, because Ernie Vaughn is a man who can talk to a mailbox for 20 minutes, and now he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Been chewing on Sunday," he said. "Haven't we all?" He didn't smile back. "Walt, that wasn't an accident. I stopped turning the screwdriver." "I know," I said. "No," he said. "I mean, I watched it. Clear as anything." He looked straight at your plate. Then he swung. Something cold walked through my chest. Suspecting a thing and hearing it said out loud are 2 different weights. And then Ernie glanced at the driveway like he expected that German SUV to appear, took a breath, and gave me the rest. "Back in March," he said, "I was walking Biscuit past your place. Kyle was out front with 2 other fellas, money guys, sounded like. They were laughing about something. I only caught one piece of it." "What piece?" I asked. And my neighbor of 25 years looked me in the eye and quoted my son-in-law word for word. "Once the old-timers in assisted living. That ranch is my down payment on the Ozarks place." For a second I genuinely thought I'd misheard. My ears aren't perfect. Words slide past me in noisy rooms. But we were standing 3 feet apart in a dead, quiet garage. And I'd heard every syllable. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do with it. My house. The house where Rachel learned to ride a bike in the driveway. The house where Marlene took her last breath while I held her hand. Already itemized, already assigned. A line item in another man's lake cabin budget. He was just waiting on the vacancy. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat at the dining table with an old photo album and took the tour. Rachel at 6, missing both front teeth, holding up a glitter-bombed Father's Day card. Rachel at 16, rolling her eyes at prom pictures. Rachel at 24 in the backyard, laughing beside her mother at something I've lost. Then the newer pages. Rachel and Kyle at Christmas. Rachel and Kyle at Thanksgiving. Rachel and Kyle in my kitchen, his arm around her waist, his smile installed, and me, somewhere off at the edge of the frame, sometimes half-cropped, usually holding the camera. I ran my thumb across Marlene's face in one old picture and asked the empty room, did I miss it? I don't know who I was asking her, God, myself. Probably all 3. Had I been so scared of losing my daughter that I'd shrunk myself down to fit in the corner of my own family? I picked up the phone to call her. My thumb hovered over her name. Then I heard her voicemail again in my head. "You have no idea what you've just started," and I set the phone down. And I made the first decision in years that had nothing to do with keeping other people comfortable. No yelling, no begging, no posting. I was going to pay attention, quietly, carefully, the way you listen to an engine that's about to tell you the truth. Because if Kyle believed age made a man harmless, he'd confuse silence with weakness. And nobody who's spent 36 years around diesel engines confuses quiet with off. After Ernie's visit, I stopped seeing Kyle as rude and started seeing him as employed every compliment on a schedule, every favor and invoice waiting to print. I told no one. I confronted no one. From the outside, my life looked exactly the same. Inside, I was running diagnostics. The first pattern surfaced fast. My future had suddenly become everyone's favorite topic. Rachel stopped by one Thursday in her scrubs with 2 coffees, and for half an hour it was wonderful, a discharged patient. My tomatoes behind the garage, the squirrel embezzling from my bird feeder. It felt like before. Then, stirring her coffee without looking up, she said, "So, have you thought about downsizing?" I watched her over my mug. This house is a lot for one person, she said. It keeps me busy, I said. Your knees, Dad. The basement stairs. I appreciate the worry, I said. And then it came, casual as a weather report. Do you still have the original deed somewhere? There it was. Not loud, not dramatic. Just placed. Somewhere, I said, easy as anything. You should really organize that paperwork, she said. Probably should, I agreed, and gave her nothing else, and watched a flicker of disappointment cross my little girl's face, a flicker I'd have missed a month earlier. Marlene always said our daughter was a terrible liar. Turns out she wasn't much better at hiding an assignment. The next Sunday, Kyle showed up carrying wine that cost more than my week of groceries, the first gift in 6 years of marriage that wasn't an opinion. He praised the steaks, asked about the truck, offered to mow my lawn with his zero-turn 20 minutes, tops. I'm good, I said. I like mowing. And I caught it. The quick, flat glance he traded with Rachel, the look married people share when a script goes off the rails. That glance bothered me more than any insult. Because insults are weather, but glances are climate. A week later, he tried again, strolling up while I was under the Silverado changing oil. You still do this yourself? I enjoy it. You know, if you ever wanted to simplify, houses in Lee's Summit are bringing crazy numbers right now. So I hear. You could grab a condo somewhere warm. Not a beach guy, I said, and kept wrenching. He laughed his networking laugh. Well, you won't want to maintain all this forever. And I slid out from under the truck and looked at him for a second longer than was comfortable. Kyle. Yeah? I've lived here 32 years. The day I don't want it anymore. You'll be informed. His smile stiffened around the edges. Fair enough, he said, and left 5 minutes later. That conversation stuck with me not because it was menacing, but because it was rehearsed, delivered, like a listing presentation he'd practiced in the car. The following Tuesday, I had an ordinary appointment with Dean Halverson, my attorney for 20-plus years, the man who handled Marlene's estate, who once golfed 9 holes with me before we agreed to never speak of our scores again. I'd come in to update a beneficiary form. Routine. Dean finished the paperwork, slid the folder over, and then leaned back and said, I've been going back and forth about whether to tell you something. My stomach tightened. Go ahead. Your son-in-law called this office. A few months back. About what? I asked. He didn't ask about your file, Dean said carefully. He asked. General questions. What kind of general? The kind people ask, Dean said, when they're curious about aging parents. He wanted to understand how conservatorships work. I sat very still. He asked what happens when an older homeowner is judged unable to manage his finances. The room got smaller, and he asked whether moving into assisted living changes the ownership of a person's house. My jaw was tight enough to crack a walnut. What did you tell him? The only thing I legally could, Dean said with the ghost of a smile. Nothing. He never said your name. He didn't have to. We sat in that silence together, 2 old men reading the same page. Finally, Dean said, Walt, I don't like assuming the worst about family. Neither do I said. But those aren't curiosity questions. No, he said. They're logistics. I drove home slow that evening, not for traffic, but because every mile dissolved another excuse I'd been maintaining for 6 years. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe it's just his sense of humor. Maybe Rachel will handle it. Maybe I'm too sensitive. One by one, gone. That night I stood in my garage, my favorite room in the house. Tools hung exactly where my hands expect them. Old Missouri plates on the wall, and I picked up the framed photo from our 25th anniversary. Marlene laughing because I'd cremated the first round of burgers. I ran my thumb over the glass and said it out loud. They think getting old means getting easy to move. The garage didn't answer, but somehow she did. Next morning I called Dean before 8. I want to make some changes. What kind? He asked. The kind, I said, that makes sure nobody ever again mistakes my kindness for a signature. He was quiet a moment. Then, I'll clear my afternoon. Here's what surprised me most. The paperwork wasn't about revenge, and Dean never once treated it that way. He asked me one question that reframed the whole thing. What outcome lets you sleep at night? And I thought about it honestly and said, I don't want to punish anybody. I just never again want someone planning my life without asking the man living it. So that's what we built, across 2 meetings and a session with an estate planner, a revocable trust. An independent trustee, no family, no friends, no leverage, updated medical directives, rewritten powers of attorney. Every document saying the same quiet sentence in legal language. Nobody steps in over Walt Jensen because they've decided they know best. No traps, no recordings, no theatrics. Just a grown man locking his own doors. And I'll tell you something strange. The day those papers were signed, Kyle got smaller in my head. For the first time in months, my world grew back past him. Ernie showed up one Saturday with 2 coffees and one question. "You still got that 71 Chevelle in the back garage?" "Needs work," I said. "There's a meet in Grain Valley next weekend," he said, and shrugged the way men our age do when they're being careful with each other's loneliness. "Maybe it's time." I almost said no out of pure habit. Then I heard Marlene, clear as the radio. "You're allowed a hobby too, Walter." The following Saturday, Ernie and I stood in a parking lot full of old Chevys and Fords and more stories than sheet metal, drinking gas station coffee while strangers argued carburetors like foreign policy. Nobody asked what phone I carried. Nobody priced my watch. One silver-haired fella spent 15 minutes telling me about rebuilding a Camaro with his grandson. Another told me to stop by his shop any time, and meant it. Driving home, I realized I'd laughed more in 4 hours than in the previous 4 months. The week after, I started volunteering Thursdays at a non-profit garage that fixes donated cars for veterans getting back on their feet, brakes, alternators, the occasional transmission. I came home filthy every Thursday night, and lighter every Friday morning. Funny thing about helping strangers, it reminds you that you're still worth something at the exact moment your family forgot. A month after the barbecue, Rachel called. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Out," I said. "You've been hard to reach. Been busy." "Doing what?" "Little fishing, little volunteering." A pause. "You never told me. You never asked." Silence, not angry, just familiar. For 30 years I'd arranged my life around everyone else's calendar. Now they had to find room in mine. Neither of us knew the dance yet. One evening after dinner, without planning to, I pulled a yellow legal pad across the kitchen table and wrote my daughter a letter. Not an angry one, not a legal one, the true one. About her mother. About how scared I'd been since we lost her. About why I kept swallowing every little cut because I believed that standing up for myself was the same as losing my daughter. And near the bottom, my pen wrote a sentence that surprised even me. "I never needed you to choose between your husband and your father. I only needed you to notice when someone treated your father like he didn't matter." I stared at that line a long time, because it was true, and true things have weight. Then I folded it, sealed it, wrote her name on the front, and put it in the top desk drawer. She wasn't ready. Maybe I wasn't either, not yet. A few days later, Ernie leaned on my fence while I washed the truck. "You hear the latest? Your son-in-law's telling people you've been acting erratic." I laughed. "That's new?" And Ernie grinned and said, "This part is. He's organizing a family meeting to clear the air." Neither of us believed that for 1 second. 2 nights later, Rachel called, voice careful. "Kyle wants everyone together Saturday to settle things. Will you come?" I looked out across the yard, the redbud throwing its long evening shadow, the pool holding the orange sky, and I noticed something remarkable. I wasn't dreading it. I wasn't going there to defend myself, or argue, or audition for respect. That season was over. "I'll be there," I said, calm as Sunday. She exhaled thank you. And then I made one more call. "Dean, I think it's time." He didn't ask time for what. He just said, "I'll meet you there. Now, slow down with me, because this next part I've replayed 100 times, and you've earned every second of it." Saturday came in warm and clear sprinkler weather, burger weather, and instead I drove to my daughter's house with my attorney's silver sedan in the mirror behind me. And the strangest thing rode shotgun. Peace. A month earlier I'd have rehearsed arguments the whole way. Now there was nothing left to rehearse. The truth doesn't need practice. Dean stepped out with his slim briefcase and asked, "Ready? Remember, we're not here to fight." "I know," I said. "We're just done pretending." Rachel and Kyle's house is a big 2-story on the west side. Kyle loves calling it his dream home, and usually forgets to mention which bank is doing most of the dreaming. Inside, everyone was already assembled. Rachel, Kyle, his parents, my sister, my nephew. Even Ernie invited, I'd learn, because Kyle had heard he witnessed the barbecue and wanted him managed. The room went quiet when we entered. Kyle clocked Dean immediately and laughed out loud. "You seriously brought a lawyer?" I smiled politely. I brought a man who's very good with paperwork. Kyle's grin widened, wow, dramatic, while Dean shook every hand in the room, calm as a Tuesday. Rachel's eyes were searching my face. Dad, what is this? I believe, I said. Kyle wanted to clear the air. I do, Kyle announced, planting himself by the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, hosting his own intervention. We've all been uncomfortable since. The phone incident. Nobody spoke. He scanned the room. I think Walt owes everyone here an apology. Walt. Not Dad. Not even Mr. Jensen. Funny how respect leaves a family one word at a time. Dean glanced at me. I gave him the smallest nod, and the briefcase opened. What is that? Kyle said, smile still holding. Dean's voice was the same one I'd heard across his desk for 20 years. Level, unhurried, inevitable. Mr. Jensen asked me here because certain misunderstandings have developed regarding his estate and his future. Kyle laughed once. What estate? Dean didn't look up. Over recent weeks we've completed a comprehensive plan. A revocable living trust, one folder onto the coffee table. Updated medical directives, a second folder. Revised durable powers of attorney, a third. And an independent professional trustee. The room's temperature changed. Rachel blinked. You did all that? Yes, I said. I didn't know, she said. I know, I said gently. Kyle crossed his arms. I don't see why we're discussing this. Dean looked directly at him for the first time. I think you do. And for the first moment all afternoon, Kyle stopped smiling. Dean folded his hands. Some months ago, he said, a caller reached my office asking general questions. Rachel frowned. What questions? Dean kept his eyes on Kyle. About conservatorships. The word landed in the room like a dropped wrench. About how elderly homeowners lose financial control. Silence. About whether entering assisted living changes ownership of a house. Rachel's head turned toward her husband in slow motion. You called my dad's attorney? Those were hypothetical, Kyle said, too fast. I'm sure they were, Dean said pleasantly. I work in real estate finance, Kyle said, louder. Lots of people ask thousands of people work in real estate, Dean agreed. They don't typically phone their father-in-law's personal attorney to ask how old men lose their houses. Nobody breathed. Kyle's father looked at the carpet. His mother's hands nodded in her lap, and my daughter stared at her husband like a stranger had unzipped his face. Why? She whispered. Kyle threw his hands up. You're all making this sound worse than it is. I was planning ahead. For what? Rachel said, and her voice cracked down the middle. For our future. And my daughter took one slow step backward, physically backward, away from him, and said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. My father's future is not your financial plan. The ceiling fan turned. Nobody moved. Kyle scanned the room for reinforcements, his parents, my sister, my nephew, and found nothing but floorboards and folded hands. And then Ernie Vaughn, 72 years old, cleared his throat from the corner. I saw the stake, he said. Every head turned. That wasn't an accident. That's ridiculous, Kyle snapped. Ernie didn't raise his voice. Men like Ernie never need to. I've known Walt 25 years, he said, looking Kyle square in the eye. You looked at his plate, then you swung your arm. And then, into the longest silence of the afternoon, Ernie added the rest. And I heard you back in March. In front of the house, Kyle's face lost its color by degrees, like a screen dimming. Once the old-timers in assisted living, Ernie recited, that ranch is my down payment on the Ozarks place. Rachel turned back to her husband one final time, and her voice came out barely a whisper. You told me that was a joke. Everyone's blowing this out of proportion. No, she breathed. It wasn't. And that's when I stood up, not in anger, because I wanted the room to hear every word at conversational volume. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone, I said. I came because I spent almost 40 years building a home with my wife. I looked at my daughter. I wanted my retirement to be about fishing, old cars, and Sunday dinners with you. Instead, I found myself checking whether I needed to defend my own front door. Nobody interrupted. I never cared about the phone, I said, turning to Kyle. I cared that you found humiliating me funny. And I cared even more this part, I said to everyone, that somewhere along the way, I started believing keeping the peace meant accepting disrespect. I was wrong about that. The silence that followed wasn't awkward and wasn't tense. It was just honest. Maybe the first fully honest silence that family had shared in years. Dean quietly clicked his briefcase shut. I believe our business here is concluded, he said. Nobody stopped us at the door. Behind me, Rachel said one word. Dad and I turned, and my daughter stood there with 100 sentences jammed in her throat and none of them able to move, and then she simply started to cry. I gave her a small, sad smile and walked out into the sunlight. In the driveway, Dean asked how I felt. I started the truck and searched for the word. Lighter, I said. He nodded like a man who'd seen it before. That's what happens, he said, when people put down the things that were never theirs to carry. I drove home with the windows down for the first time in a very long while. And here's the lesson that whole afternoon taught me, the one I want you to take even if you forget everything else. The mistake most people make is believing boundaries are walls you build against people. They're not. They're the paperwork of self-respect. And the people who get angriest about them are always the ones who had plans for your open door. Life didn't turn to glass and sunshine after that meeting. Real life never does. I still woke at 6. My knee still complained on the stairs. Marlene's chair still sat empty across the kitchen table. Some things don't change because you finally told the truth. 3 days later, Rachel called. I let it ring through, not punishment. I just didn't have the words yet and mowed the lawn instead. A week after that, she knocked. She looked wrung out. Dark circles, hair tied back fast, no armor. She looked like the little girl who used to come home swallowing tears after a lost softball game. Can I come in? Of course. I made coffee. She sat down in Marlene's chair without thinking, then froze. I'm sorry, and I said, it's okay, and meant it. We didn't touch the coffee for 5 minutes. Then, I didn't know, Dad. I believe you, I said, and I watched her decide to be braver than that. But that's not the whole truth, she said, staring into her cup. I saw the jokes. I heard the little comments. I just kept telling myself they were small. They were, I said softly. One at a time. She looked up. But together, they were a direction. Her eyes filled. I should have stopped it years ago. And I put my hand over hers on my kitchen table and told her the truest thing I had. You loved your husband. I still do, she whispered. I know, I said. And I love you. I know that too, she said, and cried the quiet kind of crying that comes from setting down a weight. And when she left, she hugged me harder than she had in years. And I let myself hope we'd turned. We hadn't. Not yet. 2 weeks later, she was back, angry this time. Not at me exactly. At the wreckage. Kyle says everyone ganged up on him. I nodded. He says Ernie exaggerated. I see. He says your lawyer ambushed him. I said nothing. And then the question she'd actually driven over to ask, can't we all just move past it? I looked at my daughter for a long moment. Then I walked to the living room desk, opened the top drawer, and took out the envelope with her name on it. I wrote you this, I said. She reached for it, and I gently drew it back. Not yet. Her face fell. Dad, why? Because you're not ready, I said. And because right now, sweetheart, you're still trying to manage everyone's pain except your own. She wiped her eyes. I don't know what to do. You don't have to solve it today, I said. She hugged me at the door. Neither of us said his name. Another month turned. Summer leaned into fall. The red bud went gold at the edges. Thursdays still belonged to the veteran's garage. Saturdays to coffee with Ernie, or a car meet somewhere around the city, and for the first time since Marlene died, I wasn't passing time anymore. I was spending it. Then one cool September afternoon, a third knock. Rachel stood on the porch alone, and something in her face had settled, calmer, older, cleaner. She sat down and said 2 words. I left. I didn't ask for the details. She gave me the one that mattered anyway. I asked him a single question, she said. I asked if he'd have treated you that way. If Mom were still alive. She smiled the saddest smile. He couldn't answer me, Dad. Not one word. I closed my eyes for a second, for Marlene mostly. And then Rachel said the sentence that told me my daughter had come all the way back. I spent years calling it keeping the peace, she said. But all I was really doing was asking you to carry all of it alone. And then she surprised me. She stood, walked to my refrigerator, and pulled out a butcher paper package. 2 Kansas City strips. I stopped at McGonagall's on the way, she said. You planning dinner? I asked. If you'll let me help, she said. And for the first time since her mother died, someone stood beside me at that grill instead of waiting at the table. The coals crackled. The fat started talking. And my daughter reached for the recipe box, pulled her mother's index card, and squinted at the faded blue ink. The coffee grounds go in first, right? Your mother would be proud, I said, and my voice didn't entirely hold. She laughed through tears. I finally get why these Sundays mattered so much. So do I said. Now more than ever. When dinner was ready, she carried my plate out herself, carried it careful, both hands set it in front of me, looked me in the eye, and said 6 words. Eat it while it's hot, Dad. I don't think she'll ever know the size of that sentence. Months earlier, someone knocked my dinner onto the ground to show a table full of people what I was worth. Now my daughter was standing guard over my plate. No speech, no ceremony, just respect, served warm. Sometimes that's the whole banquet. She and Kyle divorced quietly the following spring, no courtroom fireworks, no celebration from me. Honestly, I felt more grief than victory. No father dreams of his daughter's marriage ending. But I'd learned something that couldn't be unlearned. A marriage, a family cannot survive when respect only flows in one direction. These days, Sunday dinner still happens. The guest list is shorter. Some weeks it's just Rachel and me. Some weeks Ernie wanders over, or a couple of the veterans from the garage stop by after church. The table's not as full as it used to be. But the laughter is real, and nobody at it is performing. Every so often I catch myself glancing at the deep end of the pool. The phone's long gone. What stayed wasn't that splash, it was everything I finally understood after it. I used to believe protecting my family meant absorbing whatever they handed me. I don't believe that anymore. Getting older doesn't make you worth less. It just means you've finally logged enough miles to tell the difference between love and obligation. And once you can tell those two apart, friend, the whole road gets lighter. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually do this week, and it costs nothing. The next time somebody's joke lands on you the same target, one more time say one calm sentence out loud. That one lands on me, not with me. Once. No anger, just data. You'll learn everything you need to know from what happens next. And here's the question I'd leave on your table, the one I chewed on for 6 years too long. How much of what you've been calling keeping the peace is really just keeping quiet? Now it's your turn, because I've second-guessed that splash 100 times. Put a 1 the comments if you think the phone in the pool was exactly right, one silent answer to years of noise. Put a 2 if you think I should have used words that day instead of $1,100 of electronics that the splash gave him ammunition. Put a 3 if you think I waited far too long. And the real mistake was 6 years of swallowed jokes, because some nights I'd vote 3 myself. Tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It still amazes me how far these backyard stories travel. And if you've ever been the person at the table everyone's just kidding about, or the parent whose kids forgot to ask if you were okay, tell me about it below. Somebody reading this tonight is rehearsing an apology for something done to them, and they need to hear that they can put it down. If this story meant something to you, subscribe and stay a while. I've got a lifetime of them, and this little corner of the internet only keeps its porch light on because folks like you keep coming back. Thank you, truly, for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Kansas City, Missouri, to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.